My child, I want you to close your eyes and picture a night so dark that it feels like the stars themselves have turned their backs on the world. It was only a few hours ago, in a place where the roads twist and turn like snakes through the empty fields, far away from the safety of the city lights. The town nearby was deep in slumber, every window dark, every door locked tight against the unknown, unaware that something ancient was waking up just a few miles away. There was a deputy out on patrol, a man who had driven these roads 1,000 times before, his tires humming a lonely rhythm against the asphalt. He was tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from seeing too much of the world's sadness, and his coffee sat cold and forgotten in the cup holder next to him. He thought this was just another shift, another night of silence, but the atmosphere was shifting around him in ways he couldn't yet see. The air that night felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the sky had lowered itself to press against the earth, waiting for something terrible to snap. His radio was murmuring in the background, a faint, scratchy folk song fighting to be heard over the static, a ghostly melody that sounded like it was coming from another time. It was the only sound in the car, a thin tether to reality until suddenly even that was taken away from him. Without warning, the radio cut out completely, not with a burst of static or a fade, but with a sharp, violent silence that rang louder than any noise. He frowned, tapping the dashboard, trying to bring the comfort of the noise back, but the device was dead, leaving him alone with the sound of his own breathing. And then it hit him, a smell so foul and foreign that it made his stomach turn instantly. It wasn't the smell of garbage or decay that he was used to. It was sharp, sour, like wet earth mixed with something that had been rotting for a century. It flooded the car, thick and invisible, forcing him to gag and roll down the window just to get a lungful of clean air, but the outside air was just as tainted. If you have ever felt a sudden, unexplained fear when you were alone, I want you to type, "I trust my instincts" in the comments right now. It is your spirit warning you, just as his was warning him. Through the windshield, his eyes caught a flicker in the distance, a faint, wavering glow out in the middle of the dark field. At first, his logical mind tried to explain it away. He thought it might be teenagers with a bonfire, or perhaps a farmer burning brush. But as he slowed the cruiser, the beams of his headlights cut through the tall grass and revealed something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't a fire at all. It was a stillness, a scene so perfectly arranged that it looked like a stage, set for a play no one wanted to watch. There, lying in the grass, was a shape that looked undeniably human, surrounded by something that had no business being in a farmer's field. He saw stones, large, smooth stones, arranged in a circle so precise it looked like it had been measured by a mathematician. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a primal warning drum, as he grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the damp night. The beam of his light shook in his grip, dancing over the grass until it landed squarely on the figure inside the circle. It was a man, lying flat on his back, with his arms resting peacefully at his sides, his eyes closed, as if he were in a deep, dreamless sleep. But the deputy knew better. He had seen enough death to recognize the stillness that comes when the spirit has left the body. He grabbed his radio, his voice trembling as he called out to dispatch, "I've got a body out here off Route 17, send backup now." The silence of the night was soon shattered by the wail of sirens and the blinding flash of red and blue lights cutting through the dark. Other officers arrived, their boots crunching on the gravel, their faces grim as they approached the scene with caution. They moved slowly, stepping carefully as if the ground itself might be a trap, their eyes drawn instantly to the strange circle of stones. These weren't random rocks pulled from the soil. They were polished, identical, and placed with a deliberate intent that felt almost holy, yet deeply wrong. In the center lay the man, undisturbed by the chaos of lights and noise around him, looking like a piece of art laid out for display. This is where the story takes a turn that defies all logic, a twist that sent a shiver through even the toughest men on the force. One of the officers, a veteran who had worked the beat for decades and thought he had seen it all, knelt beside the body to confirm the death. He reached out his gloved hand, expecting the familiar icy chill of a corpse, the stiffness that sets in when life is gone. But the moment his fingers brushed the man's arm, he jerked back as if he had touched a live wire or a hot coal. His face went pale, his eyes wide, with a mixture of confusion and fear that unsettled the younger officers standing nearby. "What is it? What's wrong?" a rookie asked, his voice shaking, sensing the tension radiating from the older man. The veteran didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the body, his hand hovering in the air, afraid to make contact again. Finally he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "He is warm. This man has been dead for hours, but he is still warm." The rookie scoffed, shaking his head, thinking the old man was losing his nerve, or that the cold night was playing tricks on him. He stepped forward, arrogant and sure, and pressed his own fingers against the dead man's wrist to prove a point. But he froze instantly, his skepticism vanishing as he felt the undeniable heat radiating from the skin. It was soft, pliable, and warm, exactly like the skin of someone who was sleeping, someone who had been alive just seconds ago. Yet there was no pulse, no rise and fall of the chest, no breath fogging in the cold air. The man was gone. The officers looked at each other, fear creeping into their eyes, the static from their radios sounding like whispers in the heavy air. They checked their watches, checked the signs of decomposition. Rigor mortis had already set in, stiffening the limbs. By all medical laws, this man had been dead for at least 12 hours, perhaps even longer. But the warmth remained, clinging to him like a secret, defying the cold earth and the cold night. What could possibly keep a body warm when the soul has fled? If you have a theory, tell me in the comments. Type "I think it was," and let me know what you believe caused this. They tried to rationalize it, grasping at straws to explain the impossible. Maybe the ground beneath him was hot, but when they touched the earth it was damp and chilled from the recent rain. Maybe the stones were retaining heat. But when they laid hands on the smooth rocks, they were as cold as ice. There was no chemical smell on the skin, no heater hidden nearby, nothing that could explain this phenomenon. They stood there in a circle of their own, their flashlights cutting through the rising fog, afraid to speak too loudly. It felt as though speaking above a whisper might wake some. Anything else up, something they couldn't see but could definitely feel, because this wasn't just a murder scene or an accident. The atmosphere was thick with a presence that watched them. They didn't know what I know. They couldn't perceive the spiritual weight that had settled over that field. This was something bigger than a crime. It was something older than the laws of science. This field wasn't just dirt and grass. It was a place the townspeople avoided, a place with a history of shadows. And the man lying in the center wasn't just a victim. He was a message sent from the other side. The warmth wasn't life holding on. It was something else refusing to let go. "My child, you need to understand something important about the location where this body was found, because the field itself is a character in this terrifying story. The people who have lived in this town for generations don't like to talk about it. They keep their heads down when they drive past it, as if looking at it might invite something in. It is a place that everyone silently agrees to avoid, a patch of land where the grass seems to whisper secrets to the wind, and the air hangs heavier than anywhere else in the valley. The old-timers sitting on their porches will tell you stories passed down from their grandparents, tales of strange lights dancing in the sky above that grass. They speak of shadows that detach themselves from the trees and move on their own, and voices that call out your name when you are standing absolutely alone. They call the land cursed, haunted, a thin place where the barrier between our world and the next is worn down to almost nothing. Even the farmers, practical men who work the earth, let that specific field lie fallow, refusing to plant crops in soil that feels wrong. Animals, with their instincts sharper than ours, refuse to go near it. Birds don't nest there. And stray dogs whimper and bolt if they wander too close. But the stones, the ones found around the body, those were something entirely new to this dark landscape. No one in the town remembered seeing them before that night, and certainly not arranged in such a deliberate, chilling manner. These weren't rough rocks dug up from a field. They were smooth, polished and perfect, as if they had been carved by hands that possessed knowledge far beyond human ability. The officers at the scene were baffled because there were no tire tracks in the mud, no footprints leading to or from the circle. These stones were massive, far too heavy for a single man to lift, yet there was no sign of machinery or drag marks on the damp earth. It was as if they had simply materialized out of thin air, placed there by a force that didn't need to touch the ground to move matter. And the body in the center wasn't thrown there in a hurry. It was laid out with terrifying precision, like a piece of dark art or a message meant to be read. This brings us to the man himself, the one lying warm in the cold grass. Who was he? And why was he chosen for this ritual? He wasn't a stranger to the shadows. In fact, he had spent his life walking paths that most people would be too terrified to even look at. He was a man who had made choices that bound him to forces he couldn't control, thinking he was the one holding the leash. He believed he could use these dark energies to get what he wanted, power, wealth, control, and then walk away unscathed when he was done. He thought life was a negotiation and that he could make a deal with the darkness and outsmart the consequences. But he learned too late that you cannot bargain with things that are older than time itself. You cannot outwit a force that sees every hidden corner of your soul and knows your desires better than you do. He had Calais. Out to the shadows, invited them into his life, and they had answered his call. They gave him exactly what he asked for, granting him a season of success and influence. Have you ever wanted something so badly you would do anything to get it? I want you to pause and think. Type "I choose light" in the comments to declare that you will never make a deal with the darkness, no matter the temptation. The dark always collects its debts, my child. It never gives anything away for free, and it always comes back for what is owed. To truly understand his fate, we have to look at who he was to the people of the town. He wasn't a recluse hiding in a cave. He was someone everyone knew, a man who blended in perfectly with the daily rhythm of life. He was the guy you would see at the diner on Sunday mornings, sipping coffee and laughing at the local gossip. He was the neighbor you'd chat with at the market while picking out apples, talking about the weather or the price of gas. But behind that friendly smile and those casual conversations, there was something heavy hiding behind his eyes. He had always been drawn to the forbidden, to secrets whispered in the dark, and to promises of power that came with a heavy price tag. He wasn't born evil, no one starts that way, but he chose it, step by tiny step, decision by decision. Years ago, he found something. Or perhaps it found him. Maybe an old book in an attic or a voice in the night promising him the world. It offered him a life beyond the ordinary, a life of influence and ease, and in his hunger he took the bait. He spoke the words, he made the promises, and for a while it worked just like he hoped. He rose higher than anyone expected, acquiring things that made others look at him with envy. People noticed the new car in the driveway, the sharp, expensive clothes, and the way opportunities just seemed to fall in. Oh, his lap! But every gift from the dark comes with a chain attached, invisible but unbreakable, and he didn't feel the weight until it was too late. The town didn't really know him. They saw the mask he wore, the friendly neighbor who always had a smile. But there were signs for those who paid attention, small glitches in his perfect disguise that hinted at the truth. There were times he would disappear for days, returning with a look in his eyes that made you want to look away. Animals knew. Dogs would growl low in their throats when he passed, and cats would hiss and scatter. The air around him would change when he entered a room, as if a shadow was walking just a step behind him, unseen but felt. He hid it well, covering his tracks with charm, but the truth always finds a way to the surface. And that night in the field, the truth finally caught up with him in the form of a circle of stones. His death wasn't a random tragedy or a heart attack. The warmth in his body was a signature. The dark had come to collect its due, and it didn't arrive with chaotic noise or fire. It came with precision, with silence, and with a terrifying certainty that left no room for escape. He had tried to break the deal, tried to run, when he realized the cost was his soul. He thought he could hide in this small town, blend in with the normal folk, and live a quiet life. But the shadows reminded him of the oldest rule: you don't leave the dark, it leaves you. The warmth remaining in his body wasn't life holding on, it was the entity holding on, refusing to let him go cold. It was a mark, a warning to anyone who found him, written in the language of the unseen. The officers standing in that field felt it, even if they couldn't explain it to their superiors. The air was wrong. The silence was too heavy, and the field itself seemed to be watching them. This presence wasn't human, and it wasn't kind. It was older than the mountains surrounding the valley. It moved in the shadows, pressing down on every heart that dared to enter that circle. It didn't need thunder to announce its arrival. It arrived with a quiet power that made the stars seem small and distant, and it wasn't there by chance. It had a specific purpose tied directly to the man in the grass. He had betrayed the forces he called upon, trying to keep the gifts while refusing to pay the price. The officers tried to find answers, checking the ground and the stones, but nothing made sense. They wrote their reports with shaking hands, knowing deep down that this wasn't just a crime scene. It was a message, a reckoning, and something the town would never be able to forget. By morning, the whispers had already started to spread. My child, by the time the sun finally broke over the mountains the next morning, the town was already buzzing with a nervous energy that hadn't been there the day before. The whispers started early, drifting through the air like smoke, filling the diner where locals gathered for their morning coffee. At the gas station and even on the steps of the church, people huddled together, trading stories about the field, the man, and what it all meant. Some called it a curse, shaking their heads with grim certainty, while others whispered about judgment or something far older that they didn't have the words to name. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer, warning them to stay far away from that patch of land, their voices tight with fear. The air in the town felt different now, heavier and charged, as if the entire valley was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it didn't stop with just talk. Strange, unexplainable things began to ripple through the community, small at first but impossible to ignore. Lights began to flicker in houses that had never had electrical problems before, blinking on and off as if signaling something. Dogs would suddenly start barking at empty corners of the room, their hackles raised, staring intently into the dark at something their owners couldn't see. People woke up in a cold sweat from dreams they couldn't quite explain, vivid images of smooth stones and lurking shadows lingering in their minds long after they opened their eyes. The town wasn't the same anymore. That night in the field had left a mark not just on the ground, but on every heart and every home. To truly understand what was happening, you have to look back at the history of that field, because it holds secrets much older than the town itself. Long before the first house was built or the first road was paved, that field was known as a place of stories and power. The native people who walked this land first spoke of it as a sacred space, a meeting point where the veil between worlds was dangerously thin. They never built on it. Instead, they left offerings there, not out of worship, but out of a deep respect and a need to keep the balance, to keep whatever lived there at peace. When the settlers arrived, they ignored these warnings, driven by their need to conquer and build, but the field refused to be tamed. No one could explain why crops simply wouldn't grow in that soil, or why farm machines would break down the moment they crossed the property line. They called it bad luck or poor soil, but deep down they knew it was something more, something that defied explanation. Over time, the stories grew into legends. There was talk of a hunter who went missing in those tall grasses, his rifle found days later lying in the dirt, completely untouched. There was the story of a child who wandered too close and came back changed, speaking of voices calling to them that no one else could hear. There was the farmer who tried to clear the land, only to wake up the next morning to find his tools scattered and his fences torn down by unseen hands. The field wasn't just a piece of land, it was a threshold, a doorway where the rules of our world didn't seem to apply. And now, with a body lying in a perfect circle of stones, the town was remembering those old stories and feeling their truth in a terrifying new way. The man found in the field was no stranger to these secrets. He had heard the whispers just like everyone else. Maybe he had laughed at them once, but eventually he was drawn to the field, pulled in by its power and the promises it seemed to whisper. He wasn't the first person to seek answers there, and he certainly wasn't the first to think he could harness what lay within. Others had gone before him, looking for power, for answers, for things they didn't understand, and the results were always the same. Some came back changed, shadows of their former selves, while others didn't come back at all. But this man thought he was different. He thought he was smarter, stronger, capable of taking what the field offered and walking away unscathed. He was wrong, and the price he paid was a warning left for everyone to see. But this story isn't just about him or the field. It is about the town and the people who live there. It is about the choices we make when we think no one is watching, and the paths we walk without knowing where they lead. The field has always been there, a silent witness watching the lives unfold around it. The man wasn't alone in feeling its pull. Others in the town have felt it too, though they might never admit it out loud. There is the teenager who sneaks out at night, drawn to the edge of the grass, feeling a thrill of danger he can't explain. There is the old woman who clutches her cross and rays a little harder every time she has to walk past it. There is the farmer who takes the long way around just to avoid looking at it, though he can't say why. The field calls to them, quiet and persistent, like a whisper in the back of your mind that you just can't shake. Have you ever felt drawn to a place that gave you the chills but you couldn't stay away? Tell me about it in the comments. Type "I felt it too" if you've ever experienced a place that felt alive. And the town has its own shadows, my child. The man in the field wasn't the only one making dark choices. Others have walked similar paths, maybe not as far, but close enough to feel the chill of the dark. There is the shopkeeper who lies to make a sale, the neighbor who spreads gossip to feel a moment of power. There is the parent who turns a blind eye to their child's pain because it is easier than facing the truth. These are all steps, small steps, toward that same edge where the man fell. The dark doesn't always appear with stones and circles. Sometimes it comes in whispers, in small choices, in moments we think don't matter. But they do matter. Every single one of them matters. The officers who found the body felt it too. They couldn't just leave it behind at the scene. They went back to the station, filed their paperwork and tried to move on, but the field stayed with them. The veteran officer stared at his ceiling that night, unable to sleep, seeing those stones and feeling that unnatural warmth. The younger officer, who had scoffed at first, found himself driving past the field days later, slowing down to stare into the dark. They didn't talk about it to each other, but it changed them. It changed everyone who stood there that night. As the days went on, the town changed too. The whispers grew louder, and the stories became wilder. People started locking their doors at night, a habit they had never needed before in this quiet valley. Children were warned to stay away, but some of them, driven by curiosity, didn't listen. They would sneak out, daring each other to step inside the circle, to touch the stones, to see if they could feel what the officers felt. And they did feel something, maybe not the warmth, but a chill, a weight that sent them running home to hide under their blankets. The church became fuller on Sundays, the pews packed with people seeking answers and comfort. The pastor spoke of faith and light, trying to offer hope, but even he would glance nervously toward the field when he thought no one was looking. The diner became a hub of stories, each one stranger than the last as people tried to make sense of the fear. An old man swore he had seen lights moving in that field years ago, lights that looked alive. A woman claimed she heard her name called from the grass, a secret she had kept for decades until now. A child drew a picture of the stone circle without ever seeing it, and his mother burned it in fear. The field had become a legend, but it was more than that. It was a mirror reflecting the town's own fears and secrets. My child, eventually, the secret could not be kept. The man's name was finally spoken aloud, whispered first in the corners of the grocery store and then shouted in bold headlines across the newspapers. When the truth came out, people gasped and shook their heads in disbelief, claiming they never would have guessed it was him. But if you looked closer, there were some who weren't surprised at all. They had seen the shadow lingering in his eyes long before he died. They had felt the strange unease whenever he walked into a room, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. They hadn't known exactly what it was back then. They didn't have the words for it. But now, everything made terrifying sense. He had chosen to walk with the dark, making deals in the shadows, and in the end, the dark had claimed him completely. His story didn't stay local. It spread like wildfire beyond the town limits, carried by news trucks and curious reporters looking for a sensation. They descended on the valley with their cameras and microphones, asking questions that missed the point entirely. They spun wild theories about secret cults, serial killers, or government experiments gone wrong, trying to fit a spiritual mystery into a physical box. They didn't understand, and perhaps they couldn't understand, that what happened in that field wasn't a crime in the traditional sense. The field wasn't a crime scene to be analyzed with tape and powder. It was a reckoning, a moment where the unseen world stepped into the light. But my child, you must realize that this story isn't just about him or the field or the town that is now forever changed. This story is really about you, about the choices you make every single day and the paths you decide to walk down. The man in the field made the fatal mistake of thinking he could play with fire and not get burned, that he could use the dark and walk away free. He thought he could take from the spiritual realm without giving anything back, that he could gain the world without losing his soul. He was wrong, dead wrong, and his story stands as a warning carved in stone and written in unnatural warmth. It is a sign that the dark is real, that it watches, and that it waits for an invitation. But it is also a sign of something much more powerful, that the light is real, stronger, and eternal. Your life, your specific path, and your ultimate destiny are not written by the shadows or by chance. They are written by something greater, something that has been present since before the foundations of the world were laid. Have a plan for you, a purpose that no mistake you make, no failure you endure, and no darkness you face can ever undo. Before you were even born, before the stars were hung in the night sky, I knew you and I called you by name. I wrote your story not with fading ink or crumbling stone, but with love and intention. When I open a door for you, a chance, a moment, a new beginning, no power on earth or in hell can close it. Not your fear, not your doubt, and certainly not the whispers of the night that try to scare you. And when I close a door, when I end a relationship or turn you away from a path you wanted, it is not to hurt you. Have you ever had a door close in your life that hurt at the time, but later you realized it saved you? Tell me about it in the comments. Type "it was protection" if you believe God was guarding you. It is to protect you, to guide you away from cliffs you cannot see and toward what is truly meant for you. You might not see it right now. The world might feel heavy, and the answers might seem miles away. That is okay, because faith isn't about seeing every single step of the staircase before you climb. Faith is about trusting the one who knows the way, trusting that I am leading you even in the dark. It is about holding on when the air feels thick, when the silence feels alive, and when nothing makes sense to your logical mind. I am working in your life even now, in this very moment while you listen to this message. Even when you can't feel it, every breath you take and every choice you make is part of something bigger. It is part of something beautiful, something that will eventually shine brighter than any shadow the enemy can cast. So, as you hear about this man and the mystery of the field, let it be a reminder to you. The choices you make matter. The direction you turn your heart matters more than you know. Stay away from the dark, my child. Do not entertain the shadows or call to what you cannot control. Choose the light. Choose the truth, and choose the path that leads to life and peace. And trust me always, because I am with you, guiding you, and holding you even in your darkest nights. Be patient with your journey, my child, for my timing is always perfect. I am never early, and I am never late. I am always right on time. What feels like a delay to you is often just preparation, getting you ready for what is to come. What feels like a loss is often just redirection, moving you toward a better gain. I am moving mountains for you, even when the world feels still and silent. Even when the air feels heavy and you are afraid, hold fast to my hand. Your story is far from over. In fact, the best chapters are yet to be written. It is just beginning, and it is going to be greater than you could ever dream. The field, the stones, and the warmth bear a warning, yes, but they also carry a promise. The promise is that while the dark may come, and while it may seem strong for a moment, the light always wins. To stay connected to that light and receive the strength you need for your journey, please click the subscribe button right now. Join our community of believers and let us walk in the light together. Subscribe now and claim your victory over the darkness.